Further ado then, thank you all so much for being to our UUCD forum today. We are here for the forum topic on Honduras and the roots of migration. Dr. Carol Wallace, UUCD member and UMD Spanish faculty, today is going to share insights from August 2024 delegation to Honduras with the Witness for Peace Solidarity Collective. And again, if anybody wants, we've got coffee there. And thank you so much for being here, everyone. Let's give it up for Dr. Wallace.
Thank you, Brett. Good morning, everyone. So I went to Honduras last August as part of a Witness for Peace Solidarity Collective delegation. And this was the second delegation to Honduras that I had done with them. I went with them on another delegation in 2017. And so part of what I'll share is some observations of changes that I saw during those two delegations. And so one of the things that was the focus of this particular delegation was the root causes of migration. Why do people migrate? What are the things that are forcing people to leave? What are the push factors in particular in Honduras that are making people feel like they can't stay? And we didn't look at everything. We looked at a variety of factors. We didn't look at things like gang violence, things like that. That was not one of the things that we focused on, although that is definitely one of the push factors that exists. But what I'm looking at more is the question of community and what is it about maintaining community that keeps people in their homes, and how are the policies that we have that are supposed to keep people from migrating actually working in counter to that goal, because a lot of them are designed to destroy the communities that would actually keep people there. All right. So for those who aren't familiar with Honduras, I thought I'd include a map. Here you can see that Honduras is on the coast of the Caribbean. The northern coast of Honduras is all the Caribbean Ocean, with Nicaragua to the south of it and Guatemala to the east of it. We flew into San Pedro Sula, which is the second largest city in Honduras, and then took several days traveling across the northern coast, over as far as where you can see the Aguan River here near Trujillo. We visited several spots along that way. Then we came back, we visited a beach on the north, and then we headed south through Cihuatepeque and La Esperanza and ended up in Tegucigalpa at the capital. So that's where these pictures are from. So the picture there of the Caribbean coast. So one of the first things that we visited the very first night we were there was the Railroad Museum in El Progreso. This is a museum of the railroads that were created particularly for the banana industry in Honduras. So a lot of the banana workers, and this train had a sign on it that said it's a fruit car that was converted into a train for the workers on the banana plantation. Now, the banana plantations for years have been a site of conflict in Honduras and other fruit-producing countries. It was interesting to see that at this railroad museum, that wasn't really visible. If we hadn't had our tour guides with us, and I already knew something about the history of the banana industry in Honduras. But just looking at the displays, you would just say, oh, it was a railroad, and nothing of the history of the kind of struggles with the banana industry, which are still going on, by the way. We spent our first couple nights with the Broad Movement for Dignity and Justice, which the acronym in Spanish is MAJ, Movimiento Amplio para la Dignidad y la Justicia. Now this was a place that I had visited on my first delegation. They coordinated a lot of our delegation, our visits to other places, as well as MAJ is basically an umbrella organization that works with a lot of local organizations, a lot of human rights organizations, a lot of environmental rights organizations, a lot of indigenous rights organizations that and helping them to coordinate their activities. The two brothers who started it, Martin, who you can see standing in the picture, and his brother Victor are both lawyers. And so they provide legal services. Victor tends to be the one who is doing more of the court cases, where Martin is coordinating more of the on the ground group training and work. And so we had more to do with Martin. Now this place was interesting to see because it was brand new when I first went there in 2017. So the blue building in front of us is a dorm building that is brand new since the last time I was there. The building with the murals on it was just a little painted shack. When they told us they were making our beds, they literally meant they were making our beds. It was that new. And they were still putting some wiring for some light bulbs and things like that. So it was interesting to see how it's developed over the 7 years since I was there. This nice new dorm building that they've created, the murals that are new, the kitchen building was pretty much the same way as it had been already the first time I was there. And then they had a new building here for organizing, for groups to come in and organize. So down here on the lower left, you see a typical Honduran meal, a tortilla, beans, a little bit of chicken or pork, usually, some avocados, some queso fresco, some farmer's cheese. And that's a fairly typical Honduran breakfast. So one of the places that we visited along the coast was Triunfo de la Cruz. And this is one of those communities that is a Garifuna community, still struggling to maintain rights over their lands. They were sounding pretty optimistic when we visited them, but I've also seen things since I got back of ongoing troubles with people trying to kick them out of their land. So they were making big plans to try to restore the land. One of the big issues in Honduras these days is the African palm. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the African palm or the palm oil plants. But Honduras is one of the places where huge amounts of territory has been taken over for planting these non-indigenous palm trees that are used to create palm oil. And if you look at a lot of your products on the shelf, you'll find palm oil in a lot of them because it's supposed to be good for preserving the shelf life of products. And so it's popular for that reason. And so huge numbers of communities have been pushed out of the way to create these palm oil plantations. And when you come in on the airplane, you can see just rows and rows and rows of these palm oil plants replacing the indigenous vegetation that would have been there. So this group at Triunfo de la Cruz had a lot of plans, and they wanted to get rid of the palm oil trees entirely and replant the native coconut trees, which are a basic part of their diet, and which have been shoved out by these palm oil plants. And so that was one of the plans that they had there, was to just get rid of the palm oil trees, which the palm oil trees only live for about 7 years anyway. And so that's one of the problems with them. Even when the farmers have been convinced to use their land to plant on them, they take about 7 years to fruit, and then they fruit once and then they're done. And so they are not a very good sustainable product in a lot of ways. So this is the group of people we met here at this Garifuna community. How many of you are familiar with the Garifuna people? About one person who I would expect. So the Garifuna people are native people of Honduras. They're recognized as one of the official indigenous groups of Honduras, but they have an interesting history because they did not exist in the pre-Columbian era, except as part of their history. So they are a combination of the native peoples of what is now St. Vincent in the Caribbean and people who were on a ship destined to be enslaved that went down off the coast of St. Vincent in the 17th century. And so the people of the native peoples of what is now St. Vincent rescued people from this the slave ship, and over the years they became one people. And so those people are now known as the Garifuna people. Now, when the British took over St. Vincent, they decided they didn't want to have all these free Black people here because that was setting a bad example for the slaves that were beginning to rebel in places like Haiti. So they put a bunch of people on ships and sent them off to the island of Roatan off the coast of Honduras. So these people, see, I think I have no, I don't have a map. So they started on the island of Roatan and then spread across the coast down as far as parts of Nicaragua and up to Belize and parts of Guatemala. And so they are known as the Garifuna people, and they have their own language, they have their own culture, they have their own food history. And so they're fighting very hard to maintain that culture in the context of contemporary Honduras, which has been a real challenge. And big part of the problem is that a lot of them have their traditional lands are along that coast. And you can guess who wants their land. All those big tourist resorts, right? Want to take over the land, say, oh, here these people are just wasting the land. They're not using it productively to make lots of money, right? They're just living there. That's a waste, right? So there have been many attempts to kick them off of their lands. And I'm going to talk about one of those in particular. So the group that organizes the Garifuna people is called the OFRANE, which stands for the Black Fraternal Organization of Honduras. And they are very proud of being considered indigenous peoples and maintaining their culture. So this is a restaurant that we went to, and a beach that we went to on that first night. I have to confess, this is not my dinner plate because I'm not a fish with the head on kind of person, not much of a fish person anyway. But I took a picture of somebody else's plate. I had some yummy chicken, and so you can see the coast area. The fishing is a major part of the Garifuna tradition, as well as those coconut palms. You look at the food that they eat, and those are basic staples, obviously. Now, this was a picture from my trip in 2017, a Garifuna community that I met at that time that was fighting to keep their land, a community known as Barra Vieja. And we met with some of them while we were there. And they told us stories about all the attempts to kick them off their lands and how they had resisted those. One of the stories that they told us, Juan Jose, the guy in the green shirt, was the one who was mostly the spokesperson for us that day. A lot of times the Garifuna women tend to be the spokespeople, but they were all off at a big meeting in Honduras that were in Tegucigalpa the day that we were there in 2017. So there weren't very many women around. And so the men were the main ones who hosted us there. Miriam Miranda, who's the general coordinator of Ofrane, is one of the people who's been under constant attack, detained while driving down the road for various things. And so being an activist in Honduras is dangerous. So anyway, the story they told us about the attempt to evict them from their land was that a bunch of armed men showed up one day. And when people are armed in Honduras, we're talking major military style weapons. And so this group of armed men showed up. They're generally unidentified as far as exactly who they represent. In a lot of cases, it's been a mix of national police, a mix of local police, and a mix of security representing the corporations that are trying to shove them out of the way. Some mix of that is usually involved in these armed attempts to evict them from their land. So this day, this group of armed men showed up and started at one end of the village and started shoving people out of their homes, shoving all of their property out into the street, and shoving people, forcibly marching people down toward the other end as they were emptying out the village. So then the plan was somebody's going to come by with a truck, pick up all their stuff. They'll have nowhere to go back to, right? They'll have no property to go back to. Well, in this particular case, in this particular situation, some of the people managed to circle back around behind the armed group, slip away from the main group that was being forcibly marched to the end of the village, and circled around back via the lagoon and a little land stretch around the other side. And so they kind of circled around both sides, came up behind, shoved all their things back in their houses, so that when the truck showed up to try to kick them all out and take their stuff, they thought it was already gone because the stuff was back in the houses. And so that they had actually managed to avoid the eviction that particular time. And so that's a story that I've told many times since that delegation in 2017. Another thing that they told us was that they were putting restrictions on their fishing. This was one of the things that supposedly in the name of protecting the coral reefs, the Garifuna people were being allowed to fish only 1 week per month, which obviously is going to cut down on the food supply majorly when fishing is a major part of the diet. And so you see this happening in a lot of places where protecting the environment becomes an excuse rather than a reason, because obviously the Garifuna people have lived there for 100 years without destroying the coral reefs. They're not responsible for destroying the coral reefs, but that becomes an excuse to keep them from engaging in their traditional practices. Another thing they told us about was that they had a school that their children attended to down the beach. A tourist resort had gone up next door, and the children were no longer allowed to walk along the beach to get to their school because it was now resort property. And so they had to walk miles out of their way out to the road and back around, which was not a sustainable thing for the kids to be able to do. So they had started their own little school where they were teaching the Garifuna language along with basic school skills that the kids need. And so at that time, they were still fighting to get the government to recognize it as a legal school. But they were determined to educate their own kids. So these are some of the kids from the school who came over to see us and sang the Honduran national anthem for us at Garifuna. And so this was a lively community, even though a lot of the women were gone that day to Tegucigalpa. It was a very lively community that we visited, and we learned a lot about the plans that they had to try to do some ecotourism on their own terms. They had created a little restaurant where they were serving traditional Garifuna food. They were creating some traditional houses that could be rented out to people, and so they had big plans to develop their community. And on this trip, we were told one day that we were going to the beach. And as we were driving to the beach, I saw a sign that said, "You're entering Barra Vieja." And I was like, "Oh, I've been here before. This is a place that I've been before." There was no sign of the community. The school was shut down. There were a couple of big, obviously non-Garifuna homes going up. There was this fence with a sign for a tourist resort. And so I spent that trip to the beach mourning the loss of this community. Now, I don't know what happened to all the people that were there that we met the first time around. Some of them, I presume, joined other Garifuna communities like Triunfo de la Cruz, where we had visited. There are a number of communities along the coast that they might have joined. But the community was destroyed, and I'm quite sure a lot of those people probably ended up making the difficult trip trying to get to the United States because their community was destroyed. So I would love to be able to learn more about exactly what happened to all of the people. Some of them probably went to the city, but definitely they had to migrate somewhere, whether it was inside Guatemala or somewhere outside. This was an anti-mining summit that we went to with Martin from the badge group that we were staying with. They have signs that say things like Honduras is worth more than mining. Here we resist, insist, and never desist in the fight for life. And so we had a good meeting with people, hearing from them about some of the things they were doing to fight mining, which is one of the big destructive things. And it's one of the things that I've found in Honduras that those of us from Minnesota can somewhat relate to. Whether it's the taconite mining, where they've got the same problem where the good quality ore has disappeared, and so now they're starting to do more open pit mining for the lower quality taconite. Like some of the very same things that we're seeing here in Minnesota are the same things that are happening in Honduras. So this was a community that's fighting a particular mining project. We walked up the hill. I didn't manage to get all the way up the hill to the mine, but so I've got somebody else's picture there of the land that's been being mined. I also didn't try to climb the water tower that a lot of people climbed up to. So that's me down on the bottom left corner, taking pictures up the water tower. So I think if I had tried to get up there, I'd still be stuck there probably. So. But and if you look at the picture on the upper right, that picture shows a piece of the taconite ore that comes from that mine. And so the commonality between what happens in Minnesota and what happens in Honduras when it comes to the mining is definitely something that we had to talk with them about. Now, not everybody from the group was from Minnesota, but there were several of us that were, and other places that are also affected by mining. So here's a billboard that we saw out on the street demanding that the president make some changes that she promised to cancel some mine contracts. And so this is saying President Xiomara Castro is the current president of Honduras. Fulfill your promise, cancel the mine, it's time. That's what this sign says. From there, we went and visited a number of the communities along the Aguan, the Bajo Aguan, the kind of the basin of the Aguan River. And there are several communities along here that are trying to recuperate land that's been taken mostly by the palm tree plantations. And so it's a constant fight. They will try to take back some of their land. Then the company will come in and accuse them of usurpation and get them arrested for taking over land that was their own land to start with. That got given over to the mining companies. And so there's this kind of constant struggle over the land rights. And they're trying to create their own communities. And you can see in some of these pictures that down on the bottom center there is a picture of the kind of fruit that comes from the palm oil plants. And the woman in the picture right in the center of the upper part of the picture is holding one of the little pods that contain the oil that come off of one of those big fruits that come off of there. And you can see some of the houses that they were building were more stable structures. There were a lot of things that were just trying to build any kind of structure they could out of whatever materials they could to try to reestablish themselves on the land. These groups in the Bajo Juan region, this is one of the most violent regions of Honduras right now because of the palm oil plants and also the banana plantations that are in this area as well. And so a number of people have been assassinated for organizing in this region. There you can see the combination of one of the more stable structures that they built in one of the communities and some of the newer kind of ad hoc structures. The picture on the lower left is showing us a well that they dug to get clean water. One of the other issues in Honduras is hydroelectric power. And this is something that I saw on both of my trips, groups that were fighting against hydroelectric plants on their rivers. Now, it's one of those ironies that hydroelectric is promoted as clean energy, right? It's not a carbon producing energy. And so hydroelectric is good energy, right? But the problem is when it's built on the lands of people who are not consulted and it destroys their water sources, then hydroelectric plant power is not clean power. It may be low carbon, but it's harmful to the communities. Sometimes the communities get completely displaced by water from the dams that are built, or the water just gets contaminated. So Pacuiles was a community that we had visited on my first trip in 2017, and they had moved a large part of their community out to the middle of the road, and they had spent months living in the middle of this road, blocking the access to the hydroelectric plant that was being built. And they had actually finally won against that particular hydroelectric plant. They gave up. And so at least for now, they've won, just like we see with Polymat, things around here, and they keep trying, right? But they have at least had a victory for them in the meantime. So they've moved back into their main community, and they're continuing to fight hydroelectric and other kinds of land grabs throughout the region. So this is another of the organizations that we met with, COPIN, this is the Civic Council of Popular and Indigenous Organizations of Honduras. Have any of you heard of Berta Cáceres? See a couple of hands, people that have heard of Berta Cáceres. She was the leader of COPIN, one of the founders of COPIN and the general coordinator. And she had many, many threats on her life. And she won the Goldman Environmental Prize in the fall of 2015, which is a major international environmental award. And so she got some international attention by winning this Goldman Prize. And so that both brought international attention to her in both good ways and bad ways, right? Good ways in terms of, and people were looking out, people were aware of her, but bad ways in terms of drawing attention to the wrong people. And in March of 2016, she was assassinated in her home. And so the young woman who's standing here with the book shows a picture of Berta. This is her daughter, Berta Zúñiga Cáceres, who became the general coordinator after her mother was assassinated. So how many of you can imagine yourselves wanting to take over the same job your mother was just killed for? But she's been the general coordinator of COPIN ever since she had just taken over. She had just been elected general coordinator in 2017 when I was there for the first time. And she's still active in that role. So here's an altar they had to Berta at their utopia or utopia, the place where they have their organizing center. They have a couple of centers. They have one that's in town in La Esperanza that is like their organizing offices, and then they have an organizing center where they have their large group meetings and things. And this was there in 2017, and I had decided kind of on impulse to bring a few stones from Brighton Beach with me on the trip, and I started giving them out to our partners as we met with them. And someone was like, "Oh, a rock, okay," but some of them really found it meaningful, you know. And so one of the places where it was very meaningful was that I gave them a stone to put on Berta's altar. And so in this picture, if you look at the little doll in the yellow in the middle in front of her picture, there's a stone under her arm that came from Brighton Beach. And so I gave it to them and told them it represented a connection between our struggles and theirs to protect water, which is one of their big issues in COPIN as well. And these are some pictures again from 2017 when we visited them with Bertita as the newly elected general coordinator. The woman sitting next to her was Pascualita, a member of the Lenca elders. The COPIN people are part of the Lenca indigenous group, which is a group that has not managed to maintain its language for the most part, but do still have elements of their culture that they try to maintain. And so Pascualito was one of the members of the Council of Elders of the Lenca people. I heard shortly into COVID that she was one of the victims of COVID. And so a lot of that ancestral knowledge lost. If you remember all that talk about, oh, it's just old people who are dying, right? So this is the office center and the radio station that they have. So this is another group we met with, Red Comal, which they are another umbrella organization that works with local communities to develop and sell products that are sustainable in the communities. And so they work with them. One of the products they were working on is panela, which is a kind of brown sugar, but it's a minimally processed brown sugar, and traditionally just comes in a chunk that has to be scraped off or boiled down with something. And but they had figured out a way to make it stay in sugar form, in granulated form. And so they were helping the communities to create this granulated panela sugar, which is supposed to have more fiber in it because it's less processed than most of the sugar that we eat. And so it's healthier, and it's also better for the environment. And so this is an example of the kind of products that they would help people develop and then sell. And that's the goal of this network of alternative community commerce, is helping people figure out what kinds of products they can make and sell. So this was a kind of farmers market that they took us to, where they were selling some of their products, including some fruit wines that they had. There was also a performance of traditional dance. You can see some of the vegetables they had for sale, and some artisan products, and earrings and things. That happened to be a pair of earrings that I bought. Once we were in Tegucigalpa, this time around, I missed out on a lot of what was happening because I came down with COVID. And so I spent most of the time in Tegucigalpa, kind of shut up in my room, trying not to spread it around. But I did go down masked to meet with this journalist who came to our hotel to talk to us. Fernando Silva is the editor-in-chief of Contracorriente, which is a primarily online news source, and they do have an English version, so it's a good source if people are looking for information about Honduras. You can go to contracorriente.red and then /en for English, and you can get current articles about what's going on in Honduras. He was also involved with Radio Progreso, which these two news sources were closely affiliated. A lot of the same people involved with the radio program too, Radio Progreso, which means progress radio, but it also means Progreso, the town. The first time I went, I found it really interesting that the call numbers for Radio Progreso are 103.3. So some of you who listen to local radio know what that means, right? I thought that was very interesting kind of comparison. They were celebrating a similar anniversary of 40 years about the same time. So some of the things that I've heard about happening since then, these trips have given me various sources of information to find out the things that are still happening there. So this was a community facing attacks by a palm oil corporation trying to shut them out. This one was inland a little bit, so it wasn't the tourist resorts, it was the palm oil. And so these people were facing armed attacks, again, trying to drive them out of their community. So this is news from the island of Roatan in a community called Diamond Rock. The island of Roatan, which I told you is where the Garifuna people first were sent. And they have been fighting the tourist resort there. Roatan has become known as a big tourist site for people to go to. After knowing what I know about these tourist resorts, I would never be able to go to one of those resorts and enjoy myself, because I would be thinking about the people who've been displaced. Honduras is one of the most dangerous people and places in the world for environmental defenders. And so the statistic I found as of January 2024, so as of last year, more than 160 community leaders have been assassinated. Most well-known was Berta Cáceres, who won the Golden Environmental Prize just a few months before her murder. And this is a news alert from Bajo Aguan, that region that we visited, talking about the murder of a couple of defenders there, Juan Lopez and Selvinoel Garcia, who had been killed for defending their lands there. So I see these kind of reports on a fairly regular basis. People have been killed or attacked. Berta Zúñiga Cáceres was attacked shortly after we were there the first time by armed men armed with machetes on the road, tried to drive her off the road and attack her. She managed to escape. So Martin has been attacked shortly after we came back from my first trip. He's the guy from Madge that I told you about, and they attacked the water defenders that were in that camp on the road, blocking the hydroelectric, and Martin got a broken nose, and somebody else had a broken leg and from attack from armed men. So these things are happening on a regular basis. Another place that you can get information from is what's now known as the CalanInstitute.org, and they have monthly news alerts about what's going on in Bajo Aguan. This is actually Witness for Peace reimagined, because Witness for Peace has shut down its Honduras program. Unfortunately, my delegation was the very last one that went through Witness for Peace. And so, but some of the staff people that were involved with Witness for Peace Honduras have reconstituted, have created this Calan Institute, or CATRA, that they are trying to maintain the contact with these various organizations that we've met with and spread the word about what's going on with them. At this point, they aren't trying to do delegations yet, but I hope at some point they might be able to do that again. Right now, they're trying to keep those community contacts open and get the word out and continue to amplify the message of these various communities. So this is the thing about the Kalana Institute, former members of the now closed Witness for Peace Honduras program. So in conclusion, when we look at the root causes of migration, the biggest thing that I see is the destruction of communities, displacement and destruction of communities. Because if you think about what's going to keep you in your home, right? It's going to be having your community, it's going to be having your family, it's going to be having those connections, it's going to be having that culture. All of those things are the things that are going to make you want to keep there and keep those. But violent evictions for the sake of developing tourism or palm oil or hydroelectric or all of these other kinds of mining, all of these other kinds of things are the things that are driving people out of their communities. And so the suggestion that's always made, well, we're going to build factories in Honduras, right, where people can get jobs, and that will take care of this. That will take care of the migration problem, right, because people will stay there for the jobs. Well, if you're going to be displaced from your community and you're going to have to work at a factory, where are you going to want to go? Are you going to want to go in Honduras where you're getting paid poverty wages, or are you going to want to try to come to the United States and get a better quality, better paying job? So all of these extractive projects are at the root of a lot of these environmental problems that are driving people out of the way. Arrests and murders of environmental defenders and community leaders. I mean, poverty is obviously a major driver of migration, so-called economic development programs that run counter to keeping people in their places. And then, of course, there's militarization, gang activity, corporate violence, all of the kinds of things that are going on that are driving people to say, well, I'm going to look for a better life somewhere else. And so when you talk about why don't people just stay home, right? This is the question you hear from people who are anti-immigrant. Why don't people just stay home? Well, these are a few of the reasons why people don't just stay home, why they come looking for something else. So I will conclude with that and take any questions.
And Sally and I can work the mics here, so if you have a question on this side, Sally will pass it, and vice versa.
Anybody here have a question for Carol? Yes, you answered every question.
Oh, no.
Oh, not yet. I'd like to have some information about these resorts and hotels that they're building. Who's building them and what language, you know, people are they looking forward to come there?
These resorts are very much built for people from the US and Europe to come. Those are the target audience of these tourist resorts. The one that had been built next to Barra Vieja that we heard the most about when I was there, one of the things that they had promised the community was that, of course, they promised jobs, right? If you give up your land, we're gonna give you good jobs here at this tourist resort, right? And among other things, they promised to hire cooks to cook traditional Garifuna food and people to share Garifuna culture. And so they made all these promises and got people to give into it. Well, when they first opened up the resort, they hired some Garifuna people to cook. And then they basically stole their recipes and brought other people in to do the cooking based on their recipes. So, and not because it was cheaper to bring these other people in, but because it was a way of destroying community. And so, as far as a lot of promises get made to communities when the tourist resorts go in, but then they usually turn into nothing like that. And the people who are benefiting are the people coming in from outside to enjoy the nice beaches.
Other questions?
I see Tina, and then we'll go for you in the back.
Thank you. I find you fascinating listening to your stories.
Thank you.
And the question that I have is, how have population reacted? I mean, does the population, the original population, go down? And other people win?
So, yes, very much so. I haven't followed the statistics in terms of how the population of Honduras has been going, but you see things like Barra Vieja, which was a thriving community, and then was taken over by a tourist resort. People were driven out, and there were houses being built that were clearly not Garifuna homes, that were big homes that were being built on that land. The school had shut down. The restaurant they had started to shut down. And so that's very much what's happening, is that kind of displacement of whole communities.
Other questions?
One at the back here, and I'll go to you next, sir.
Just to follow up on the initial question about the resorts and the Witness for Peace organization is actually closed now.
Unfortunately, yes.
And then the Quran Institute is that correct? Quran Institute. Is that active now, or?
Yeah.
And who's involved with that?
I know.
Yeah, the Kalanda Institute is a new thing that's just started since I was there in August, when they were starting to talk about what can we do to keep something going here. And so it's staff people that were involved and other volunteers that were involved with Witness for Peace Honduras, who have started this new organization so basically here we can see what they say. They works, Catra is the abbreviation for it, which a nickname for Honduran people is Cataracho. So I'm guessing that's where Catra came from. But so they work along with Black, Indigenous, Campesino, and other organized communities, grassroots organizations in Honduras and the US to resist neocolonial and neoliberal violence. So this is a lot of the goal of the original Witness for Peace. And they're still working on fundraising to become a viable organization. But so I'm hopeful that they're going to be able to make something of that. Let's see, I had somebody over here too.
Okay, in history, teach us about the influence of the United Fruit Company in politics. They would have the power through jobs and through sword of the United States to help repressive regimes friendly to the US to maintain control of the population, politics, and so on. Did you see any direct connection with American food companies or companies, whether they be oil or gas or whatever, in your company?
So there are definitely US corporations involved in all these extractive industries. There are also European, Canadian, other group, outside groups that are involved in a lot of these projects. Dole and Chiquita, that are the inheritors of United Fruit, are still very much involved in the problems with the banana industry there. Palm oil has started taking it over in a lot of ways, but the banana industry is still a big one in Honduras, and it's still related to that.
So my question was similar to Carl's, and that are there corporations? I mean, obviously there's money behind resorts that are going up. Are we going to see a new Hilton down there? I mean, Marriott, is there a list of companies that are building on the beaches in Honduras that we could know about? Be aware of and, you know, that get them out of my portfolio for one thing and those kinds of things.
Yeah, I don't know of the exact, usually they build under some other kind of name. So it's not so easy to identify, but the money behind them could be from a lot of different places. So, but I would have to do more research to find out exactly which companies are the ones that are building the tourist resorts.